All right, I think we can get started. So I'm Scott Podolsky, and I help to organize our overall departmental seminar series. And our Department of Global Health and Social Medicine is honored to team up again with the Harvard University Native American program to host a series of seminars devoted to the health of Indigenous peoples. For this, we're grateful for the wisdom and input of my colleague, Joe Gahn, and we're expected to start our overall departmental seminar series for the 2022-2023 series in this fashion. We're very excited about this. I'll get to introduce Professor Gahn himself, and he'll have the honor of introducing today's speaker, Dr. Daniel Dickerson. Joseph Gahn is Professor of Global Health and Social Medicine at our department, and Professor of Anthropology in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences in Cambridge. He's collaborated for over 25 years with American Indian and other Indigenous communities to rethink community-based mental health services and to harness traditional culture and spirituality for advancing Indigenous well-being. He's an enrolled member of the Grovon Tribal Nation of Montana, and among many other roles, is Director of Harvard University Native American Program and an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine. So with that, I'll hand this over to Dr. Gahn. My only other job is to remind all attendees that this will be recorded, and certainly if you wish to share this after the fact with other people, there will be a recording made. So, Dr. Gahn.
Thanks, Scott. I so appreciate your opening for us today, and I'm really delighted to welcome our audience, both in our department, of course, but also other folks who might be zooming in from around the country. Let me start, please, with an acknowledgement of land and people today. Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Again, my name is Joe Gahn. I'm the faculty director of the Harvard University Native American Program and professor, as Scott said. And one of the things that we got underway when I took over that role was to partner to offer this seminar series. And of course, we want to offer information of great value to our departmental community, which is very much concerned with social justice in medicine and healthcare. But we also want to reach beyond that to Indigenous practitioners and community members and so on. And so we've been, in some ways, fortunate to be able to use Zoom as a technology because of the pandemic, secondarily so, to reach a wider audience. And I'm pleased that we're able to do that today. It's also the case that at some point we'll probably shift, to a different venue where we do some in-person things. And so we'll have to figure that out shortly. But we have at least today's presenter and one more presenter in December who will be doing it in this usual way that we've become accustomed to. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Daniel Dickerson, who will be our honored guest and share with you a lot of his work. Dan Dickerson, Inupiaq, is an addiction psychiatrist and associate research psychiatrist at UCLA Integrated Substance Abuse Programs. His research focuses on the development and analysis of substance use treatment and prevention programs for American Indians, Alaska Native youth and adults. He has conducted research as principal investigator or co-principal investigator on various NIH-funded studies, including Traditions and Connections for Urban Native Americans, Native American Youth Sleep, Health, and Wellness, Motivational Interviewing and Culture for Urban Native American Youth, and Drum-Assisted Recovery Therapy for Native Americans. So Dr. Dickerson, we'll give the floor to you and look forward to being energized by your remarks. Let me just tell the audience briefly, if you have questions, the Q&A function is active, the chat is not active. But if you enter your questions in the Q&A after Dr. Dickerson is done formally presenting, we'll go ahead and start hearing from him in response to some of your questions. Dr. Dickerson, take it away. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Gahn, Dr. Podolsky, Amy, and the whole staff. And I'm really honored to have this opportunity to present with you all today. Uvanga Uni Arak, Sigvan Koya Miagwa Wainwright. I'm Dan Dickerson. Uni Arak's my Eskimo name, Inupiaq culture. I come from the Sigavan family, Wainwright, Alaska village. My family is at, and in addition to other villages throughout the North Slope of Alaska. I'd like to, let me see, I think I'm having an issue with advancing my slide. all of a sudden. Let me try a different format here. That might work better. Oh, good. Here we go. Good thing I had a backup here. Yeah, I'd like to also acknowledge the land that I'm on here in LA County, Tongva, Tatavia, and Chumash. And I recognize all the other lands throughout the US and the Boston area as well. And I really thank you for allowing me to present on the lands that you're on. And recognize that we all honor and recognize our original peoples of our land, and that we're all interconnected as well in our collective communities. Just a little background on myself. I'm Inupiaq on my mother's side, Caucasian on my father's side. I'm an addiction psychiatrist. Sorry for the typo there. I think I'm only one of 2 or 3 addiction native psychiatrists in the nation. So we definitely need a lot more psychiatrists, or maybe 70 or so American Indian Alaska Native psychiatrists in the US. So I really encourage those who are in training to consider a field in mental health and psychiatry. There's a tremendous need in that area. I'm also an osteopathic physician, very similar to an MD. So I'm able to practice medicine. I've been at UCLA since 2007. I also work at American Indian Counseling Center in Cerritos, California, which is in LA County. I grew up in Long Beach, which is in LA County, in the urban area throughout most of my life. My mother and my father met my mother up in Alaska when he was in the Army, and then they moved down here where I was born in Texas, and then we moved to California when I was like 8 months old in the 60s. I did my residency at Loma Linda, addiction psychiatry training at Yale, and my research focuses on substance use prevention and treatment intervention development and analysis for American Indians, Alaska Native. You know, growing up in the urban areas, I myself experienced many challenges. You know, there's very few Inupiaq Eskimo people in LA County. Back when I grew up in the 70s as a child, you know, the visibility of Native Americans and cultural centers and clinics weren't recognized by myself or our families. So I really honored to be able to work in a field that addresses a lot of the health-related disparities of our people. A lot of my research also focuses on urban populations. And I think of note, I think we all need to recognize that our people are very diverse. We come from many different backgrounds, many different levels of cultural identity, affiliation, exposure to traditional practices, languages, and culture, and that 70% or so live off reservations in urban areas, suburban areas, medium-sized towns throughout the US. So I think we need to recognize that we're all American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian people, but some may live in different areas of the US in different types of settings. So growing up myself, you know, it was very difficult and challenging to identify and connect with my culture. And I think that may have had a role in some of the negative side of my own health and well-being at the time. So I think a lot of us in the field are really focused a lot of our attention on to a strong degree on how can we reinstill culture, traditions, and opportunities in that regard for our people and in intervention development. So that's where a lot of my work is focused on. And I just threw in a question. You know, we say the term cultural identity, but really, what does that mean? And what does it mean to even enhance our cultural identity? Just as a open question we could kind of keep in mind as we go along. So we do have to recognize, I may be preaching to the choir if you're have attended many of these similar types of presentations, but historical trauma has impacted our communities ever since contact with colonists on the East Coast, and in Alaska, very similar history with Russian explorers, so-called explorers, exploited many of our tribes in Alaska and people in villages. So this has had definitely, unfortunately, an effect on our health and well-being. But I think we do talk a lot about historical trauma, but there's also a move, I think, throughout Indian country to really look at resilience, and to really look at how can we heal, overcome, and go forward with as a people in terms of our health and well-being, and our and how can we elevate our health status and overcome some of the health-related disparities and inequalities that we experience. So studies thus far have shown that if we do integrate culture, that although there are various findings, you know, in general, the communities really are advocating for more culture in our interventions. So it may be challenging to, I think most clinics provide a level of cultural practice, intervention, and opportunities for our people. It may be challenging, however, to bill and receive reimbursement from all possible avenues, financial avenues. So that's where the role of research can potentially help, is in helping to create more open avenues, opportunities to provide an integrated system model, and to also, you know, make sure we're adequately reimbursed for whatever cultural activities. And this is really a really wide spectrum. So culture could be learning one word of your language, going on your app. I have a Inupiaq app, word of the day, you know, that's I believe, in my opinion at least, that's a traditional activity in a sense. I'm engaging my culture, I'm learning a word in my language. So it could be fairly simple or quick activities to very intensive, you know, ceremonies and everything in between. So all of these can really be looked upon as traditional activities and culture that could, you know, help us as individuals and communities to connect with our culture. And because our culture is really founded upon a lot of good healthy behaviors. Our traditions teach us that to live healthy, to live a balanced life, to be mindful of our spiritual life, our physical well-being, our emotional and mental, and that, of course, our traditions don't you know, allow for recreational use of substances in addition to other unhealthy behaviors. So my back, I think it was in 2010, time kind of flies, drum-assisted recovery therapy for Native Americans. This was my first funded study, and it really started with individual. He should be more on top of the screen. Anthony Robichaud. I was at a workshop and I had not really met Anthony before. He was providing a drum making workshop at a local tribal clinic in Southern California. And he was teaching a group of adolescents how to make a drum, you know, all the education, what all the cultural meanings of the different parts of the drum, and really providing this workshop opportunity. And what was really kind of cool there is that he also provided them with a kind of certificate and saying, hey, I forget exactly what it said, but congratulations on making your first drum. And also a little card for the wallet or purse that said, you know, on this such and such day, I made my own drum and I pledge not to use drugs and alcohol because that's not part of our culture. Something to that, probably better said. But I was like, wow. I mean, if that's not an intervention, what is for Native people? So he and I got together and we started to think about different formats on maybe how drumming could be used in substance use treatment. And of course it's used. It's been used for thousands of years with our people. But we were thinking, okay, is there a way, you know, we could kind of, in an appropriate way, look at a culturally acceptable and adaptable strategy. So I applied for a grant through the first one, National Center for Complementary Alternative Medicine. The second grant was through National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And I really like to acknowledge, especially starting with my second study, Elizabeth D'Amico, who I've been partnering with for the past 10 plus years on different projects. And she's an amazing researcher from the RAND Corporation. Really has an incredible team of researchers whom I didn't mention, but Dr. Elena Palomaru, Ryan Brown, David Kennedy, David Klein, many others on Survey Research Group I've really been honored to work with. Dr. Carrie Johnson, one of our mental health leaders in LA and nationally, and Blanca Dominguez, our project director. And also with Native, I may be kind of all over the place today, but hopefully it all ties together. You know, when you conduct research with Native people, and I'm sure there are those in the audience who are in training and considering research as a career, you know, really we work from the community, with the community. They're the lead. You know, as researchers, we're not the lead, so to speak. We may be on paper, you know, we apply for a grant, we say we're principal investigator, we write articles, our names there and such, but you really have to always acknowledge the community and the elders and the you know, the keepers of our traditions and stories. So on this project, George Funmaker, Benjamin Hale, Dr. Carrie Johnson, or on our initial advisory board here in LA, well-recognized people really helped to shape our direction, because things come up in research. It could be a critical question on how we conduct or engage a community, how we approach a part of an intervention, how we recruit, how we analyze data. So it's really it requires a team effort in this regard. So of course, drumming is one of our most recognized traditional practices. This is just an old cave art, I believe, painting, you know, what appears to show an indigenous leader, medicine person with a drum leading the community. It symbolizes there's many meetings which I'm just providing some quick summary points, but it's sacred. It really symbolizes our nations. It really, probably most importantly, it carries our stories and traditions and songs and dances, and it's a way of honoring others, way of healing, way of bringing people together. So addiction or substance use, alcohol, drug use disorders, pretty much a disease of isolation. So this is important in this regard that, this is a community effort. So people who engage in drumming could connect with others, which is important for our overall health and well-being. And there's something to be said when natives get together. There's always, I would say, a good feeling, especially in the urban areas where we may not have that opportunity as much. So yeah, being together with other natives is really, in general, healthy for us. In the interest of time, may skip through some of these slides. So drums used from social gatherings to sacred, more sacred uses as well. And this is just a quote from a community member who really was moved by being able to drum and dance and feeling the drum and feeling connected with the teachings and spiritual connection. And at the end of this quote here, once I felt the drum in my chest, the hollowness I carried as a displaced Indian kid was gone and its place was belonging. There's also scientific studies showing that it has healthy effects on the brain. It could connect our frontal lobe with our more limbic system and our emotions and feelings. So it could help synchronize how we think and feel and that kind of connection. And studies thus far conducted. And some meditative type effects, like on brainwave activity with alpha and theta, delta waves being enhanced a bit more. So that could be some so-called scientific neurobiological potential benefits of drumming. So with research in general, I just really have to add, since I have a little bit of time in this presentation and with trainees as well, that we really need to take a community-based approach, and that there is definitely a history of unethical research with Native people, but at the same time we're under-researched. So there's a need for more knowledge of, and unfortunately without research, sometimes the ammunition for policy development and implementation of new programs is kind of stalled without some data. So, if we could, conduct research in a way that is, in partnership, total partnership, or led by the community, that's going to really, first of all, generate the knowledge in the right way, report the data in the right way, but also go somewhere, rather than the research going into, I remember when I was in training, we would go to the basement of these university libraries and these, and millions of journals, physical journals, and pull journals out of, Iowas where no one seems like no one had been in years, and we don't want our research to be stuck in the bottom of a university library just gathering dust for a few decades. The research really needs to go somewhere, it needs to be implemented and used. So yeah, that's part of the new approach, I would say, or I mean, maybe not new approach, but a part of research that's really highlighted more is implementation plans and dissemination of findings and of research. So some of the newer projects, funded programs, which I'll talk about in a little bit, really emphasize that part of research as well. So with drumming, how can we use drumming in a culturally appropriate manner? Drumming wasn't made, and many traditional activities perhaps were not made for the four walls of a medical clinic, so how do we engage our relatives our clients, relatives in meaningful activities that in the right way. So, and also our people are very diverse. It may be easier in a sense to create an intervention for one tribe on one reservation, but how do you do that with urban areas in LA where you have over 100 tribes? Well, how do you approach that in terms of intervention development? And male and female roles in different activities, including drumming. So the initial plan for an intervention was using drumming with different other treatment or so-called treatment or cultural approaches, including Don Cahoya's Medicine Wheel and 12 Steps program, which is a Native American approach of the 12 steps, cultural education, and talking circles, which that would be on another slide. I'm kind of jumping ahead. But at first we thought that it would be good to have this intervention 3 days a week for 12 weeks, which is probably perhaps a bit overkill, we've learned. Each session, maybe I'll jump to the actual session, was initially 3 hours, which included an hour of This was our preliminary model, which include first hour of education and drumming or teaching, really teaching, and then drumming, and then a talking circle to kind of process in a culturally appropriate way. This was our initial format, recognizing that you just don't go into drumming starting to hit the drum and drum right away without having some education. I attended a drum. Drumming's used throughout most people, right? I mean, in the world. I mean, there's drumming workshops that recognize all drumming throughout many cultures throughout the world. And I attended one time, and the facilitator, just to see what it was like, and the facilitator said, "Okay, everyone, grab a drum." And it was like this big airport hotel setting where people flew in for this. And really, I mean, it was good for non-native general population. So, I mean, he said, everyone grab a drum, and there were drums everywhere, like African drums, drums from this country, that country, rock and roll drum, tambourines, and what people picked up these drums and started drumming. And then within a few minutes, they were all beating like a same beat, and there was a rhythm going on, and some were dancing and laughing and having a good time like that. But that's not kind of what you're going to see in a native clinic or an elder. You're going to really start learning more of what's behind the drum with native people, and what's the teachings, and what's the purpose, what's the protocols, etc. So in order to, with developing interventions for native people in this kind of formal way, you first need to get community perspective. So you can't just run with an idea and carry it out. You have to, the community needs to step in and provide their thoughts and direction and say what needs to be done or adjusted in general. So we conducted focus groups. We also pre-tested this initial intervention as well, and then follow focus groups in order to develop our first manual. And the National Institutes of Health has like this stage model system that most evidence-based treatments follow, where you conduct focus groups, you get data, you do pilot tests, you do a small clinical trial, large clinical trial, multi-site clinical trial. Then after 15 years or so, it becomes evidence-based if the findings are favorable, etc. after you iron out all the kinks of real life implementation and et cetera. So this kind of goes, I mean, in that way, but also recognizing the need to do this, with our communities. So we conducted focus groups with our substance use providers in the community. And my apologies, this is an old slide. It should not say abuse. It should Native people with substance use histories and our community advisory board to obtain feedback. And in a nutshell, using qualitative strategies and statistical approach modeling, we found that the final overarching themes for drumming can be especially beneficial, but you need to assure a culturally based focus rather than a new age focus, so to speak. You need to provide a treatment format that recognizes diversity in this urban area that we conducted these groups, focus groups and study in, especially, and to address gender roles. So those were our findings we published like 10 years ago. And some of the groups, focus groups quotes were, yeah, you definitely want to teach the significance of drumming. This is from a community advisory board member, because drumming's sacred. It's a heartbeat of the earth. So you have to have education, hence, in order to have a hands-on experience first. Another individual said, a lot of people haven't been to many ceremonies, so it's really important to keep this going. It could help with sobriety and recovery, and it could work. It works. And another CAB member said, we know there's a relationship with someone's cultural identity and their substance use or behavior issues. So there's that relationship. So whether an individual's drummed before or not, it's important to take these first steps. And again, education here emphasized by a provider. And a substance use patient, the urban Native people are not learned in their cultures and where they are. This is important to know for that part of the nation. Urban Indians need teachings as well as the people from the reservation. So those were some just sample quotes from the article and work here. And there needs to be continued opportunities for traditional practice participation. So then we took this feedback and we provided the initial format to 10 individuals to get their thoughts. And 10 Native adults with history of substance use. And while we did this, we also threw in some assessments pre and post, cultural identity, cognition, the addiction severity index, which covers many different medical and psychiatric areas, and we use a Native American version of this. These were some of the assessments. And in a nutshell, with these 10 individuals, there were promising results with regard to, based on the ASI, Addiction Severity Index, of medical status, psychiatric status, spirituality enhancement, and physical functioning level improvement. Of course, we can't hang our hat on this, but it did provide some initial benefits and feedback from the group participants. One person said they felt grateful to be able to reconnect with the cultural traditional way of life. Another individual said, with constant distraction in my path, drumming is a way to look up from stress, to take care of things and get them out of the way. Someone else felt serenity and peace. Another participant felt uplifted and felt that the drum itself is spiritual. And And this person said, I never thought of doing drugs or drinking. I started to feel a spiritual connection. This is where I need to be, where I should be, felt at home. So after all that, we then applied and were fortunate to receive a second grant through National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism to do a feasibility clinical trial. In general, because there haven't been, now there's really, to be honest, there's the ARENA initiative. I always forget exactly what it stands for. It's an NIH amazing program that I've been funded on another project. But there's many research projects being funded through this initiative that are focused on using culture for a variety of healthcare conditions through all the institutes of National Institutes of Health. So there's really a lot of exciting work. I just wanted to throw that in there. If you Google ARENA, IRINIH, and interventions for research to improve Native American health, I think something like that. But there's a amazing webpage there that they put up on a lot of really interesting studies being done, thankfully. We did really what funders want to look at. They're not going to fund, okay, we want to do a multi-site trial throughout the whole US, that's and understandably not going to be funded if requested, if it's for a population where, really the groundwork hasn't been established and approaches haven't yet been figured out. So I was able to obtain a grant with Elizabeth D'Amico from RAND as co-investigator. And she's done a lot of RCT work and a lot of amazing work with underserved populations and homeless, including homeless populations. So we were able to get a feasibility clinical trial grant with the goal of recruiting 60, I think it was. But we recruited 63 into the study on a randomized control trial, and participants were either randomized to flip of a coin, so to speak, to DARTNA or usual care plus, just a usual treatment with some educational workshops that we provided. And the age range, we conducted this in out west here. Majority were male because we did switch sites to an inpatient program to gather, to have an opportunity to gather more data. More opportunity to kind of set up our shop, so to speak. And in this study, 33 tribes were represented. So a lot of different tribes. Alcohol, marijuana were the top substances of choice, with meth being third, and over half using commercialized tobacco. And of note, many had engaged, 78%, in at least one traditional practice in the last month. So they were already practicing, engaging in some level of traditional practices. And we used some of the similar scales and maybe and some more focus on anxiety and close relationships as well. And what we found is that those who were engaged in DARTNA or randomized to DARTNA reported significantly lower cognitive impairment and lower levels of physical ailments at end of treatment, and promising, and so those were significant findings, and statistically significant, and promising benefits, trending towards significance perhaps, were related to better physical health, fewer drinks per day, lower odds of marijuana use. But of interest to me, what's interesting and noteworthy in a sense is that, however, at 3 months, DARTNA participants reported less adoption of 12 steps, and more drinks per day and more commercialized cigarettes, commercialized tobacco cigarette use. After 3 months, after completion of this program. And, you know, we spoke with our elders about this, in a nutshell, I think what it was, or what our elders believed, was that there wasn't, you know, really the participants really liked the program. Actually, our satisfaction rates were in the over 90% of, you know, very much enjoying the and liking and accepting and benefiting from the program. Our satisfaction survey, which I did not include here. So they really liked the program, felt it was a benefit, but then afterwards, it's very possible, according to our elders, that there was just no other opportunities, linkages, and perhaps, you know, really comprehensive referral plan of continuing drumming with other groups in the community in the urban area, where it could be a little more challenging. So it's kind of like, and I personally look at it like, you know, if you go to a gym for 6 weeks, and the, you know, LA Fitness, I think it's nationwide, you know, these kind of big gyms that, you know, they're not going to say that, hey, come here for 2 months, a month and a half, and you'll quit drugs and alcohol for life. That's all you got to do. Or any church, religion, spiritual practice, you know, let's take church as an example. You're not going to go to a church probably that'll say, you know, come here for 2 months and everything's going to be great. You never have to come back. Drugs and alcohol be of no concern to you. Of course, could be for some, but usually not, I would say. So I think the take-home message is that in substance use recovery, relapse prevention kind of look at things, there needs to be opportunities to continue engagement with healthy activities, with treatment. That's probably where we're not as strong in substance use. We focus a lot on treatment, but not on the long-term 5-10 lifelong approach of staying sober, staying clean and sober. So yeah, those were our main findings for this intervention. I'm going to look at one of our Q&As. Very slow from Jessica. Jessica Elm. More acceptance of harm reduction, less stigma about behaviors of alcohol use, yet there is still tension in this area. Can you talk about the tension, this tension of observations? Do I share the same observation? Yeah, I agree that, you know, harm reduction, not to get off topic, but I think it's not off topic, that I'm all for harm reduction, going down from, I'll just throw out examples, half gallon vodka a day to 6 beers is awesome improvement. You know, switching from heroin, multiple grams per day to 2 blunts or joints of marijuana a day is fantastic, in my opinion. What a great improvement and job by the client. Of course, these are not the end goals. It's good to keep progressing to total abstinence. But yes, and that could, thanks for the question, Jessica. That could also, I know that's a whole nother topic, but we have to look at that also, because do our clients' relatives feel like, hey, I can't jump in on a traditional activity because I'm still drinking and using? So actually, you know, I didn't mention in this program, we actually did breathalyzers, which is kind of common in substance use groups as well. But we did do breathalyzers before engagement. Okay, I think we'll, in interest of time, we'll kind of go to a couple other studies I've been involved in. Motivational interviewing and culture for urban Native American youth, and also TACUNA, which kind of touch upon as well. So these next two studies are in collaboration with the RAND Corporation, Elizabeth D'Amico and her amazing team, our team, we have a lot of partners, RAND, UCLA, where I'm at, and the community and our elder advisory boards. Sacred Path Indigenous Wellness Center, Dr. Carrie Johnson's program. And it really requires these are just a few photos of those who were involved in MICUNAY, including Kamala Venner, amazing researcher, University of New Mexico, Dale Walker, who was at Oregon Health Sciences University, and a personal mentor of mine who way back when advised me to go into addiction. I said, okay. I just decided to go into addiction after his suggestion, which I'm thankful for. So, back when we developed this study, there was a lot of, and there still is, I think, a lot of suggestions to integrate currently available evidence-based practices, such as motivational interviewing, along with traditional practices. And how would you do that? How would you integrate two different kind of practices like that? So this was funded under that IRENA initiative that I mentioned. And Dr. Elizabeth D'Amico is she's like a world expert in MI, has done amazing work in MI. And I have, some knowledge and connection with the Native communities, with traditional practices. She's worked in underserved populations. She's in LA as well as I. So we partnered and were able to get funding through the ARENA initiative, and which sought to finalize the development of an integrated approach using MI and cultural traditional practices as a prevention intervention for urban Native American adolescents or youth. And our goal was to do some qualitative work to understand barriers and challenges and get feedback on the intervention. And then to do a large trial. So this, back then, the ARENA group really wanted a larger trial. So we then followed this up with a larger trial. With the goal of 100 in each condition throughout in person. This is before COVID, in person in LA, Oakland, other cities. We have many collaborators that we've had connections with and relationships with throughout California. Thankfully, very thankful for these organizations and communities. And Dr. Kamala Venner, our consultant, has done amazing work with the use of MI for Native American people. You can actually Google Kamala Venner. I wish I would have put up the link, but she has an amazing manual for using MI for Native people. So MI is really probably one of the more popular or accepted substance use intervention, kind of behavior interventions for Native American people, because it is person-centered, community person-centered. It really looks to build a relationship, not I'm the expert and you're just going to follow my direction. Nope, it's a collaboration of exploring ways of not using drugs and alcohol. It has a spirit. There's a spirit of MI in a sense, that acceptance, compassion. So a lot of good things. And Dr. Venner has found that with her qualitative work, it honors the wisdom of the client rather than the provider. So we, in a nutshell, this focused on 14 to 18-year-olds. And MICUNAY consists of 3 workshops, which I'll get to in just a minute. We used, first of all, this is just a timeline showing how we engage with communities. We rolled out the program throughout urban centers in California and conducted a trial and follow-ups as well, follow-up surveys. So this is a 3-workshop intervention. It would have been, in a way, nice. I mean, 3 was good, but 4 would have matched with the different, all parts of the medicine wheel, like exactly. So we had to kind of blend together emotional and mental in one workshop. But the point was to integrate. This again was a question: how do you integrate MI with a traditional practice and maybe using the medicine wheel? So we integrated it using kind of this approach, where first we looked at looking at the medicine wheel and how drugs, alcohol affect the brain and the physical aspects of well-being with MI as well. Workshop 2 was, looking at traditional practices, or looking at, maybe I should back up. Each workshop was 2 hours in length. So the first hour was MI focused, and the second hour was focused on a traditional practice, traditional activity. So in workshop 1, we had, engaging in beating. And so this was more on the, on our focus, concentration, and connecting with that part of the medicine wheel, and mental and emotional well-being, with an MI session that correlated with focus and physical health and alcohol and drugs in the brain. These are some of the handouts in this slide that we used for educational purposes as well. And then we did physical health, which focused on in a cooking, and this was all in person, so participants were able to learn about cooking, and then physical health and well-being of Native people, and MI that correlated with that. And then workshop 3 was on spiritual aspects and sage and smudging, and learning about Native American spirituality, and MI that focus on these aspects. And of note, we kind of went into this as this being like, it's maybe challenging to accommodate a program such as this for, all Native people, but it's kind of a starting off point of learning, where those who may not have had a chance to participate in culture can learn, and as well as those who are fully engaged in their culture, they can also enjoy or benefit or feel like this is good for them. So it's really an opportunity, 3 workshops, just to kind of get some opportunity to learn about your culture. And then from here, after the workshops, kind of be able to go forward with your own plan of engaging in a culture. And by the way, we did have a second question. The use of our traditional consultants, traditional practitioners, and the design, delivery, and evaluation stages, how they selected, how they engaged. Yes, and thank you to Shane Barnett. So we choose our consultants based on the clinics we work with, their recommendations on elders and their communities. we have a pretty good understanding of the elders in the LA area, but other communities. We also have been involved with other discussions and projects throughout the state. So we do have some conversation and knowledge of other communities. So we really followed their leads. And then, typically we will show them our interventions, and we'll definitely share the results from focus groups. And for example, in DARTNA, we gathered the data. We then presented the data to them in order for them to tell us, how this data could best be used for the intervention. We also, in our current program that we're conducting, TACUNA, which I'll mention just a few minutes, we have a monthly Elder Advisory Board meeting, every month, where we provide updates to the board, and we also have questions and discussion that we ask from them. Like if we have a need for getting new presenters for our program, in TACUNA we have monthly wellness circle gatherings. We obtain their advice on potential presenters who could teach about different cultural subjects. They are also involved in our manuscripts. We always ask them if they want to participate, and usually they do at least one for each of our papers that we publish, so that we could, get their perspective, their direction, and if something's not being expressed in the right way, let's say, or wording is really not right, or what have you, or they have additional ideas for the publication, they are involved in the publication. So, and as being an author, co-author. So those are some of the ways that we use our or work with our elders. Okay. Yeah, just to kind of wrap up on MICUNAY, we did these. This was a really kind of cool look at challenges using word. I think this is called a word cloud that our team developed, and kind of looked at different challenges urban youth reported experiencing: substance use, cultural identity, some violence, harassment, difficulties being mixed race, stereotypes, disliking, some not liking their identity, native identity, and the popular culture, view on natives being negative, were just some of the challenges expressed. These are a breakdown of our participants. Of note, not everyone in the bubble picked American Indian, Alaska Native, although you did have to self-identify to be in the study. Well, on the actual survey, some a small number actually, not a small number, but some did not mark that box. We'll get to that in a second, but sorry for going through this real quickly here, but actual substance use was similar in a nutshell to general population in these various drug classes: alcohol, drinking marijuana in general. These were some family and peer substance use, which were in general similar to other populations, we'd have to say. But there was a lot of exposure to discrimination reported, feeling discriminated, through racial slurs, being mistaken for another race. And this was asked to prove authenticity by non-natives. And many also were engaged in traditional practices. And some of the, Ryan Brown did a interesting look at cultural identity in this sample and found that there were 12 main themes in this work, some of which were that urban adolescents felt that their native identity was protective, that there was a pan-tribal identity aspect to the urban environment, mixed identity as being being relevant, stereotypes, some others that are not mentioned on this slide, stereotypes, resentment, mainstream culture class, but also cultural pride was reported. Yeah, oh, actually they're on here. So these are all the various themes that adolescents expressed. And looking at how I mentioned, some did not mark the box of being American Indian, Alaska Native on the actual survey, but that provided an opportunity to kind of compare groups. And those who did voluntarily check, interestingly, that they're American Indian, Alaska Native, reported better physical, mental health, greater happiness, spiritual groundedness, less alcohol and marijuana use, lower delinquent behavior. So this is of note due to the opportunity of being able to look at the different different aspects of, you know, the identity, this box selection aspect. And the harassment, you know, responding to Jessica's question, you know, from what I recall, there was a lot of harassment reported, you know, for instance, being on a bus and being told negative things, being harassed on the streets about your identity, being made fun of, being ridiculed in class, you know, teachers even being involved with some inappropriate comments. These were some of the kind of harassments or microaggressions that they reported. I'm hoping I'm not stuck here. Okay, great. Almost had a panic attack there. Yeah, and this kind of goes to the discrimination, you know, aspect. And of note, what I did not mention, well, yeah, I wrote actually led a paper on discrimination in part of this data. And as noted, you know, many Native youth, adolescents reported feeling discriminated against. But unlike in most studies that have been written with regard to discrimination, discrimination really does affect almost all areas of life. You know, more physical health problems, obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc., diabetes, mental health, substance use. But in this sample, there was no correlation with worse mental health with discrimination or association. So we believe, as a possible explanation, is that many of these youth who were participating in this study were engaged with clinics that provide services to Native people, were participating in traditional practices. They were perhaps stronger in their identity and their view of things. So they may have been able to offset that part of their health with discrimination. So which could then raise the rationale for more cultural engagement with our youth, with our younger Native populations. I think we'll go to this slide here. So we actually did, you know, with regard to the randomized controlled trial, looking at, you know, what we have to mention is that we had MICUNAY, and then we had control group that participated in some community gatherings, and had some had exposure to traditional practice education. And both groups, there were not significantly different findings based on alcohol and drug use. However, in both groups, both groups did not demonstrate any escalation throughout these years of the study of alcohol and drug use, which is typically seen throughout the teen years, that there's an elevation in risk and more use of alcohol and drugs as you get older, or throughout this stage of development. So it kind of showed that there could be benefit with a level of having the opportunity to engage in traditional practice programming, traditional practice interventions that incorporate traditional practice education and involvement. And, you know, and I have to also mention that in these studies with randomized controlled trials, especially, it's really, we really have to be ethical in that you want to provide some level of potential benefit to both conditions, and that may kind of raise some anxiety with some grant reviewers who are not as aware of this need for conducting highly ethical research that's needed with Native people. You know, really what's unethical is providing a condition with an intervention that's of no value potentially, or of not benefit. So we really need to find, and RCTs, speaking of that, may not be the only way of conducting research with Native people. There's other alternate designs that could get at trying to understand what the community is saying, and that these interventions can be a benefit. But how do we do it? How are they helping Native people? How much involvement is needed, and et cetera. So that's kind of like what research tries to get at, from my experience. And I'm sure there's other Native researchers who could add a lot more as well. But, you know, so in a nutshell, these two interventions, MICUNAY and the cultural education control group, both had some demonstration improvement, but in terms of no differences rather, but they did not escalate in their use, which could be of note here about the potential benefits of cultural programming for urban Native American youth. And of course, there's a need for a lot more research in this population. Okay, in the final few minutes, if I'm able to advance a slide. And this acknowledging Michael Woodward, others from RAND, and for facilitators. TACUNA is our current study, opioid use prevention intervention study. Now, I'll just provide a very quick overview of this study, but hopefully thorough. This is an opioid use prevention intervention for urban young adults. Young adults ages 18 to 25 who are in urban areas, self-identify. And we take a similar approach to MICUNAY in that we have these 3 workshops and we integrate motivational interviewing in the same way. And our traditional practices are different though, based on our focus group. This age group was interested in storytelling, in addition to cooking, hands-on cooking, and sage and smudging and prayer and spirituality. And we also incorporate a social network. David Kennedy, an expert in social network research. And how do our social networks look like in the urban areas, especially with regards to who we hang out with, our family, our friends, our coworkers, etc. Who in our network engages in traditional practices, who in our net or not, who are native or not, who use drugs and alcohol or not, etc. And providing these kind of, if you notice on the social network on the right, this little diagram, it's just an example of what's generated for participants after they do the baseline survey. They fill out these questions on their social networks, and these kind of diagrams are generated for each participant. It's really interesting because at least myself, I mean, we don't think and look at exactly who we hang out with, who we spend time with, and how that looks, especially with regard to alcohol and drug use. So this is, I believe, an interesting part of this study. So we did do focus groups again to learn about to learn more about the barriers and challenges of this population, pilot tests, the workshop, finalize the approach. These were some of the themes that focus group participants, including parents, providers, and young adults, expressed that need to be included in the program, and other need to be incorporated into the TACUNA intervention. Historical trauma, colonialism was highly mentioned, and the potential challenges of driving and getting to traditional practices, financially and geographically in the big cities with traffic and distances, etc. And controlling and learning about how do we cope with our emotions and how that plays a role in substance use, and rather than, how can we use more coping strategies and culture rather than turning to opioids and other drugs. This was funded through the National Institutes of Health, healing, looking to help heal addictions in the long term. We're one of two Native funded studies. Our study for urban people and young adults, and one in the Cherokee Reservation. And the participants really liked these diagrams. They felt that it was interesting, kind of fun even, kind of look at them and help you visualize who might be affecting you. I apologize for my lack of tech savviness, but I wanted to throw these, our community, we've written a few articles thus far in this study. We're getting towards, the end of our RCT, but these are just community-based press releases. So, our community is not going to jump on PubMed and look at, research articles to see what's going on. So we developed these kind of press releases here on some of our, through the help of amazing team at RAND with Michael Woodward, and kind of a lay person's term to what the article is saying. I thought I'd throw those in. So in a nutshell, hopefully this program as well addresses knowledge gaps on how we integrate culture and can use RCTs to potentially help generate some data. So with that, I think we have some time for questions. Yes, Dr. Gahn?
Indeed we do. Thank you so much, Dan. This has just been fantastic. And we have about 14 minutes till the bottom of the hour, so we'll consider a few things by way of exchange. You've already addressed a couple of the questions that have come up in the Q&A. But again, thanks for such an engaging and informative talk. And, I have to say that Dr. Dickerson, first of all, as you said, is one of the only Native psychiatrists in the country. There's not that many. I don't know if there's a dozen or whatever, but in terms of ones who do research in particular, you really are someone who's standing out in this respect. So we're so glad that you were willing to come and share your research projects with us. These research projects are really important also, I think, and distinguished by the fact that you're undertaking randomized controlled trial work, which is really, really difficult to do in Indian country. It's often the case that we look around the research that's been published on American Indian Alaska Native mental health and well-being, and we find maybe a handful of RCTs have been done on these topics, and that's not very many. And that's because it's very difficult to do. So Dan, I really applaud you. I admire the fact that you've been willing to undertake more carefully controlled outcome studies on these topics. And finally, the third thing you're doing that's so important and desired is the integration of cultural practice and cultural tradition into mental health approaches and treatments. This is what our communities ask for and really actually often demand. Sometimes they don't even want the typical mental health conventional approaches, but that kind of integration is so important. So these are, I think, why the work that you do stands out in such important ways. If we can, I just want to pick your brain a little bit about, it's a little bit delicate, I suppose, given some of the work that you've done and the nature of our commitment in Indian country to the idea that traditional culture, indigenous cultural practices are so important for health and well-being. It's interesting because with some of the RTCTs that have been undertaken, you mentioned Dr. Kamala Venner, University of Mexico, who's done an RCT comparing different kinds of treatments for substance abuse in a Southwestern tribal community, in which the outcome of the intervention was that, treatment as usual was pretty much just as good as the modified adapted treatments relative to the primary outcome, at least, which is, reduced substance use and misuse. And I note that Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart recently published a randomized controlled trial using group interpersonal therapy with a historical trauma intervention kind of modified. And as I was reading that more recently, I sort of realized that it looks like in that RCT, the adapted intervention that has the historical trauma focused piece to it actually exacerbated PTSD symptoms in the folks who came through that trial. And finally, in your DARTNA work you talked about here today, you noted that especially at the 3-month outcome place, the folks who went through the intervention ended up having more substance use. And the logic of the randomized controlled trial, of course, is that all of this is causal. So what we're saying here with respect to taking these RCTs, at least in this respect, is that the incorporation of the cultural or augmented interventions is actually causing more symptomatic response than not. And so that's obviously it's a sensitive, delicate thing to kind of broach, but I think, maybe there's something to be thought about here. I'm just wondering, what do you think our obligation is as researchers who do this work, trying to discover, findings that will help our communities when we come up against, findings that seem to go against the grain, at least in terms of what has been shown.
Yes, thank you for, that excellent question and points, because I also assist on evaluation of a program, family-based urban intervention for families for prevention of health, overall health, mental health, called Native American Drum Dance and Regalia, headed by Dr. Carrie Johnson. And we're beginning to look at some of the data, and there is some increase, and I can't say this officially yet, but we can definitely at least confidently say that there appears to be more anxiety with one part of the intervention, and that's also a brain just scratcher in a sense, but also brings up this kind of what's going on here question with regard to some increase in symptoms. And we've had preliminary discussions with our advisory board on that project, and we're looking to actually develop our next version of the intervention. And it may be, I don't know if you're getting at this, Dr. Gon, or thought about this or as well, but could discussing, very seldom, I think, do we have the opportunity in urban areas, at least in many other areas, to really talk about our hurtful and perhaps untalked about issues that may our clients' relatives may have or are experiencing with regards to trauma and other other unfortunate symptoms in our communities, including historical trauma and the hurtfulness that may have the history that may have had on our grandparents, our parents, ourselves, our relatives, our communities, and deeply hurtful stuff. So yes, it's conceivable that you could go through an intervention and say, hey, here's historical. I hate to say it like this, but I mean, I'm psychiatrist, like, not to sound insensitive, but in a way we're talking shop in a way. We're used to saying historical trauma, suicide, abuse every day, in our work. And we're kind of, hopefully not deconditioned, but in a way we're like, we kind of throw these terms out. But someone who's, in the client in the community, that's not verbalized. If anything, that's hidden under, really hidden in the community as secrets that perhaps even. So we really need to, this was also brought up. Dr. George Funmaker and I did a series of trainings throughout the state of California on cultural identity and these kind of, and use of a survey for like an intake. Like, let's say you come into a mental health clinic, substance use, and you usually do an intake, right, where you get a mental health history or psych history, or if you've been in a psych hospital, if you experience abuse, suicide history, family history. Even those questions are really, really potentially triggering. And when we're giving these trainings, we realize more and more that you may not want to ask these questions, of course, on day one of meeting someone. It may not be till 6 months or a year that you even start to ask about some of these topics. First, you need to establish trust, rapport, and that kind of comfort, and then go from there. So I could see how, we have a study and we have these deliverables that we have to make, and you go in there and you provide the intervention and collect some surveys. I mean, yeah, it's looking back at it now that we're getting some data. I mean, there's definitely we may need to kind of like rethink exactly how we're approaching this.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Well, right. So complicated, right? And requires lots of collaboration and partnership to sort these issues out. And one other domain in which that collaboration and partnership matters so much, and I see it through all the work that you're doing, of course, is the notion, particularly in multicultural urban spaces, for how to deploy cultural practices when, as you said, there are so many different tribal affiliations represented. So, there is no indigenous culture. There are just hundreds of cultural practices, some of which are shared, some of which are not. And you talked about, obviously, with the drum-assisted recovery, even the potential disagreements around drumming. And this is sort of near and dear to my heart because my family, the Gone family at Fort Belknap, actually has had a drum for a long time, known as the Hayes Singers, after the community of Hayes on the reservation. And they were one of these drum groups in the 70s who had women singing on their albums alongside the drum. And, women's involvement in the drum has been controversial. And I thought it was interesting that your DARTNA group had such a high proportion of men. It was over 90% men, right? And I'm just wondering how that might have resonated culturally, and in particular, if you can give us any insight about how do you navigate these touchy, sensitive, people feel strongly about these things. And some people feel very strongly that women should not be at the drum, but others, there are women drum groups, so there's contestation, right? And I'm just wondering what you experienced and how you maneuver through these kinds of sensitivities.
Yes, yeah. The first part of your question, we in our study we moved to a facility that at the time had like men at the facility. But that being said, yes, and before we moved it there, we did have some women and interested and participating, and some women a couple maybe that I recall may have come in there thinking, oh, this is great. I get to drum. I'm really always wanted to, learn about this, not knowing, I'd say that these couple individuals did not know that part of the cultural history or teachings that, in general, men drum. And so we, not to put it onto our facilitators, but in a way, our elders, our facilitators really look to provide that education and to more fully tell the stories of the role of men and women, that women are not inferior. It's not a discrimination thing. If anything, women are more highly revered in our communities. And this kind of, our elders could say it better than I. But we really, our facilitators really more emphasize the education, and with that being said, there are women groups. There are women who definitely traditionally and more in a contemporary way are doing the drumming. So there's definite diversity in a women place, I think, for these different groups. And with the Pan-Indian, sometimes that's like not a totally desirable word, Pan-Indian in general, among us Native people. But that being said, it's kind of part reality in urban areas. So our interventions mostly taken on a powwow kind of drumming approach and teaching and powwow drumming. That made sense to our community to use. And that's also kind of lines with our weekends, our powwows on the weekends, to hopefully connect with.
I could see that. That's, yeah, very nice. Wow. Okay. Well, Dan, we're coming to the end of our time. I just want to convey my thanks to you for joining us and presenting this really important work. I'm so glad that we got a chance to see more of what you've been up to, and wish you well as you continue on in this way. I should add that our next Indigenous Health and Wellbeing seminar or colloquium will occur as in partnership again with the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine's ongoing seminar series. It will be December 7th. Featuring Dr. Amy Bombay, talking about the impacts of the residential school system in Canada on Indigenous people there. With that, Scott, let me give it back to you in case you have an announcement. And thanks again, Dan. We're so grateful for your participation.
I just want to thank Dr. Dickerson for a wonderful presentation, and Professor Gahn for leading us through this. And we'll see you all soon.
So long, everyone. Take care.